Ashley, and if you're new here, I just wanted to welcome you. I make content to help encourage Christian singles, and we are getting up close and personal today. I just wanted to change up the angle so you guys can let me know if it's too close. You get to see all of my flaws. But I do apologize. I really try to stay consistent with making these videos, and then 2 weeks pass by. I'm like, oh geez, I meant to film that last week. And this video I did really want to film last week, but the time change got to me and I was just so drained by Sunday. I was like, I am not my best self right now. So I prayed about it and I just decided to wait to share. So with that being said, if you saw the thumbnail, I'm getting very vulnerable and very open here for the world to see. I do want to just welcome my new followers. I think it's just really cool to see this community growing, and it just makes me feel just happy that you guys are here, happy that I can encourage you in this single journey wherever you're at with that, and just knowing that these videos are helping you in some way, it just really brings me joy. So with that being said, I just kind of wanted to share some things that I've been struggling with and just kind of what God showed me in that. And I think as a single, it can be really hard when you see other people just receiving things that you've been praying for and things that you've been just kind of waiting on with God, and just kind of wondering, okay, you know, when is that going to be for me? And I usually I'm not a jealous person. Like, I would never consider myself a jealous person. I've been, like, throughout my life just very, I don't know, just really assured that God had me where I was for whatever reason. I just, like, jealousy just hasn't been a thing for me. Obviously, other sins, other things, definitely, but jealousy, not really ever. Except, I would say this last couple of weeks. And I think a lot of that has to do with just things that I've gone through these last couple of weeks to share a story about, like, my job situation. I am in a new job, and that's a whole nother story for a whole nother time. I'll probably share it this time next year, so stick around for that. But anyways, not to get too sidetracked, but I think kind of that brought on this thought process for me. And with jealousy, I was really finding myself very jealous of women who had men who could provide for them, who had a husband where they didn't have to stress about quitting their jobs or stress about staying home with the kids, because these were women who had that freedom to walk in even like a time of heartbreak to step away from their jobs. And like, just seeing that, I found myself getting very jealous of that. Like, since I would say my adult life, I've worked 2 jobs. I've always been very self-reliant, and I found myself just getting really bitter towards God and the fact that I didn't have someone that I could lean into, that I didn't have someone that I could, take a break from, the stress and just providing for yourself. And I was wrestling with that. I was seeing people being able to just rest in the safety and the comfort of having their husband or like the man they're dating be a provider for them. And I was telling God, like, don't you see me? I have been working and being my own provider, and I don't know, it was just weird. It was something that I hadn't really experienced before as far as jealousy goes. And I was struggling with that and praying about it and like getting to the root of that jealousy. And kind of coupled with that was this temptation to settle and this temptation to just do what the world does to find someone, do what the world does to get married and do what the world does to be in a relationship. And like that temptation began to start replaying in my mind. Like the more I thought about what other people had and like that jealousy, it started to like be a play in my mind, like a repeat play, right? Of, okay, well, this is how you get that. Like, this is how you navigate your relationships to be able to be where you want to be. And honestly, I was like spiraling in that. Like, I was questioning, like, God, why am I waiting? Like, why am I waiting in purity? Why am I doing things according to your way when your way has left me lonely? Why am I following this narrow path because nobody else is on it, and feeling very isolated? And God, he used this past Sunday to really speak to me on that. And I just wanted to share what God spoke to me and what God revealed through some notes. And if I'm looking down, it's just because I'm looking at my notes. But it was just crazy, the timing of this sermon, because it was I truly believe meant for me, like, truly meant to speak to what my heart was feeling. And the title of the sermon was The Time of Promise. And the pastor was talking about the promise given to Abraham about like the stars in the sky, like your descendants will be like of the stars in the sky, the promise that God gave to Abraham. And our pastor was talking about how God had given Abraham like a visual of the promise. He gave Abraham a promise, but he also gave him like a visual of that promise. And as the time draws near for the promise, you can begin to really question why you're waiting. And that's really where I was at. Like, I was questioning, like, why am I waiting, God? Like, it's only left me alone. It's only left me seeing what everyone else is getting. And I was just in that mindset of seeing what everyone else was getting. And it says here in my notes, said Abraham didn't have any kids, but God still gave him a promise. And that's honestly where I felt like I was at. God hasn't given me any of the things that I've been praying for, any of the things that I've been waiting for. But God has given me a promise for a godly husband, a man who's going to lead me spiritually. And one of the next notes says, when our faith runs short and our time runs long, we become desperate. I'm going to read that again. It says, when our faith runs short and our time runs long, we become desperate. and he just shared the story of Abraham and how he was promised with Sarah, that his descendant would be through that. And when it just seemed like God wasn't coming through on that promise, they decided, okay, let's get the maidservant, let's have our child through her, because obviously God isn't coming through on this promise. And some of the notes here say when we get desperate, our vision becomes cloudy, and in the cloudiness is where we think a bad idea is actually a good idea. How Abraham and Sarah, in their minds, they thought, okay, this is a good idea, even though it wasn't a good idea. Like, instead of trusting that God was coming through on his promise, their vision blurred, and they made up in their minds a reality that wasn't what God had for them. And I think that's what I was doing. I was in my cloudiness and in my vision of seeing what other people had, and struggling with that jealousy. I was beginning to create a vision and create a plan for myself that, okay, the way that I'm going to get that is by dating according how the world dates, or lowering my standards in that. And the next note is the enemy doesn't want you to be or the enemy doesn't want you to believe that God is coming through on the promise. I'm going to say that again. The enemy doesn't want you to believe that God is coming through on the promise. And I think time really lends to that. When it's been a really long season of waiting and praying, the enemy just really can get in there and discourage you, especially when you're seeing other people walking in the promise that you've been praying for and the promise that you've been waiting for. And you're just like, okay, God, how can I get to the promise? Because the promise isn't coming. The promise is too far. It's been too long. And the next note is, don't create your own destiny. Wait for the promise. And that's what Abraham and Sarah were trying to do, is they were trying to create their own destiny. They had the promise, right? They knew that was where they were going, but instead of continuing to wait, they were creating their own destiny. And that's really where my temptation was at. It was okay, God, this is taking too long. This is too painful. I don't want to be relying on myself anymore. I don't want to be working 2 jobs anymore. It's too much. I don't want to continue in this anymore. It's too hard. And I feel like God kind of met me in that, in the sense of showing me that I was trying to create my own destiny because of how badly I wanted this promise, of how badly I wanted to rest in the safety and the comfort of having someone else in my life. And I feel like God, part of this sermon, the next note was, remember God's creation isn't restricted by natural laws of life. And the pastor was just kind of talking about how, if you get a diagnosis, like a cancer diagnosis, or something the world says is how this is happening, in the natural realm, this is impossible, but God is the creator. He is the one in charge of what's happening. And he kind of said this analogy, as a parent, you say when bedtime is, and you say, when dinner time is, and when you have dessert, right, for your kids. And so the kids just kind of go off of that time, right? Because you're the one who has set the boundaries on that. But as a parent, you can change that. You can say, okay, well, this is the way bedtime usually is, but tonight we're going to stay up late and watch a movie and, have like snacks or whatever. So in that instance, because you're the parent and you've set the boundaries, you can also like create new. And it's the same with God. Like, even though we feel restricted by the laws of this world and what's happening around us, and it seems impossible, God is the creator of it all. And he can bring something completely out of nothing. And to, I guess, not walk in the restrictions of what the world says. And I think that's really what was lending to that jealousy, right? Because in my mind, the restriction was, these people are all receiving something that I want to be able to walk in. I want to be able to walk in that comfort, and I want to be able to walk in that peace. But that's not where God has me right now. That's not where God is leading me. And can I trust that he has his best in store for me? Can I trust that beyond what I'm able to see, that he can work past that? And the next note on that is, everything the world says cannot happen can happen with God. I think, once again, like, as you're getting older, like, the probability of being able to have kids dwindles and the probability of being able to have a family, those are just things in the natural that the world says cannot happen. And I just remember like talking to my mom and sharing with her like how I feel like that window is closing for me. And she she was trying to encourage me. I don't think there's anything she really could have said that would encourage me in that moment. I think I was just really stuck on the impossible of it, really stuck on the logistics of time, and how I just felt like God had kind of passed me by, passed by someone who loved him and was devoted to him, but somehow I wasn't worthy of the things that other people were getting. And I didn't know why. I didn't really understand, like, God, why are you passing me by? And the next note said, hold on to your promise, hold on to your hope. And God's always really spoken to me through hope. I think when I was like 16 years old, there was this sermon on hope, and I posted the sermon notes on my wall, and I always had that on my wall just because I just feel like God has really set hope in my heart. And it says, hold on to your promise, hold on to your hope. And, my promise is that God is sending a godly husband for me. My promise is that this man that God has for me is coming. And the next note is, don't let your promise be stolen from you. And what the pastor was just talking about is, a lot of times, like, what other people say can steal your promise, or even what you say to yourself can begin to steal your promise, right? Like, what was I speaking over myself? I was speaking over myself that God wasn't coming through for me. I was speaking over myself that God had passed me by. I was speaking over myself that I wasn't worthy of the promise, that somehow all these other people were worthy, but I wasn't. And the enemy loves to say, can't you see your promise isn't coming? I'm going to say that again. The enemy loves to tell you, can't you see your promise isn't coming. And that's truly what the enemy was speaking to me. Just the amount of despair I had, the amount of sadness, and the amount of just heartbreak. And I wanted to share all this because they're real emotions. They're real things that I was experiencing. And but the promise, right? The promise for me that God is coming through, and that I have to hold on to it even if it's been a long time, even if it doesn't look like it's coming through. I cannot redirect my destiny because I want it now, or that it seems like it's been too long. I just wonder, like, how different would things have been if Abraham and Sarah had waited? You know, like, what would their story looked like if at the very end they finished well? And with that said, like, if you've messed up, or if you've fallen back into temptation, or fallen back into sin, or God has grace for that. And the story of Sarah and Abraham is really a testimony that even though they went their own way, and even though they created like their own destiny, God still redeemed their story. And that's just the beautiful nature of God and his love for us, is even if we have messed up, and even if we have fallen short, God's love and his grace like still meets us in that promise. So if you feel like you've messed up, and you feel like, man, I had this promise from God, but you know, I caved to sin, or I caved to my flesh, and I don't feel like God has that promise for me anymore. I just want to remind you of this story. You know, I want to remind you of the story of Abraham and Sarah, and just let that encourage you to know that even though you've messed up, God's promises aren't limited to the natural, right? He is a good father, and he is forgiving. And when we come to him with our brokenness and the things that we've messed up with, like he can still redeem our story. His promises don't fade away just because we have really messed up. And I just, like, if you're watching this and you feel like, man, I feel like God gave me a promise, but I feel so far from that promise now, I just want to encourage you that you're not so far away that God can't bring it back. And you're not so far away that God doesn't still love you, and that he doesn't still care. And really the testimony for me from this is just, what do we do when we've struggled with jealousy? What do we do when we've fallen short in our thought life, or, you know, acted upon our sinful nature? We go back to God and we say, God, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry that I was walking in jealousy. I'm sorry that I allowed my thoughts to drift into, you know, how the world is structured. I'm sorry. You can fill in the blank for that, but just be honest with him. Be honest with him about where you fell short, and ask him to bring you back. Ask him to restore the hope of your promise, and restore the hope of what he has for you, because he is a redemptive God. He's not done with your story. And where the enemy wants to have you is believing that God isn't coming through on the promise. But what I want to encourage you with, and what I want to remind myself with, is that God is coming through to finish well, even though it's been a long season. And if you feel like your vision's gotten cloudy, or your hope has faded in some way, I want to encourage you to be real with God in that, and ask him to meet you there. Ask him to restore your hope. Ask him to restore your vision. Ask him to remove a spirit of jealousy, or remove a spirit of idleness, or, you know, sinfulness of lust or temptation. I think as a single, those are real things that we struggle with. And I just want to, share this because I want you to walk in a boldness that God is going before you. I want you to know that even though it may have been a hard season, or you're going into a hard season, that God sees you in it and He hasn't forgotten you. And I want to try to put my notes in the description because I want you to be able to read through those scriptures and just be able to be encouraged. So I thank you for watching this. I'm sorry, like, if I wasn't looking at the camera a lot. It's just, I had a lot of notes here that I was looking down at, so I do apologize for that. And I just want to encourage you to keep moving forward and to keep believing that God is coming through in His promise, even if it's been a very long season. He has not forgotten you. He has not forgotten the promise, and to continue to hold on to that with an expectant hope. That's what I want to end with, is we can hold on to something like kind of sorrowful, or kind of like not believing that God is coming through because it's been so long. I just think of David versus Goliath and his confidence that God was going before him. He was so confident that God was going before him that he faced the giant. And I think that is the posture that we need to be carrying with a promise from God. It's not walking in like maybe the bottom of the barrel scraps that God is going to provide for me. It's walking in a confidence that God has His best for me, that God sees me and He knows me, He understands my heart, and therefore I can go against the giants. Therefore I can walk in the midst of people receiving the things that I'm praying for and still like be happy for them, and still know that even though they have the thing that I'm praying for, I can still trust that God is coming through for me. I can still trust that God and His grace is working behind the scenes, and to be one who waits in expectant hope. And so I just want to encourage you with that. I want to thank you for watching. I want to thank you for sharing my videos. And if you're new here, I appreciate you being here. So I just pray that your day is blessed.